Just now my deputy went to the toilet, so you might want to wait for a bit. Okay. Just give me a second. All right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Given the choices of people on earth, the morality of all of their conduct in life affects their afterlife. For example, whether they are going to enjoy eternal happiness or an eternity of torture, right? We think that it's an inherent right for these individuals to access this piece of information about the existence of the good and bad place. Before I move on to my arguments, a few pieces of setup. What is the counterfactual and what does it look like? We think that the majority of the people on our side are generally aware of the system, while the belief is instilled upon people to allow them to do for the better. So how is this belief likely to be propagated? So for example, in school, since the kids are young, the teachers will use this as a disincentive to tell the kids not to do bad, and it looks like having general discussions with friends, etc. And individuals do not know how much scores they have when they are alive. And it works like how the divine judgment works. All of their scores, their credit scores, based on the evaluation of the morality of their conduct, will be evaluated upon your death, and there's no way to overturn the decision. So the morality of conduct, how the moral of your actions are evaluated, right? Well, we will take into account of two things. Both will be evaluated symmetrically in the same weightage. Number one, the intention of the action. What are your intentions while doing something? And for example, charitable donations, what do you do for them, etc. And second, the effect of the action itself. To what extent that have your actions affected your people around you, and have they lifted the lives of the people? Have they benefited people on earth, etc. So the comparative under their side of the house is that people do not know about the system, but the system still exists. It's definitely not status quo because both sides defend a world that's reimagined. So people do not have the concept of hell and heaven as well, because this is symmetric to what we are arguing in this debate. Okay, so now moving on to the argument. So why are individuals entitled to this principled right to acknowledge about this existence of the system? Two lays this. Number one, on why people are entitled to this piece of information, and number two, how it affects the ability for people to make choices, which ultimately affects their afterlife. Number one, the first part, and why people are entitled to know about this information, right? So why is this the case? People are proximately and are severely affected by the circumstances. If they do bad, and they need to suffer eternally, and if they do good, they can enjoy eternally as well. So the severity of the circumstance, it affects you literally for the rest of the eternity, and which is an indefinite amount of time. And what is this analogous to, right? For example, extreme sports, you have to know about the risks that come by, and on cigarette boxes that they usually print lung cancer pictures, etc., to allow smokers to understand that if they smoke lung cancer will strike one day. So the importance of this, realize that irrespective of the practices or of the practicals, the right to know about the system is one that is definite, which means to say that even if you have absolutely no access to information about the existence of this good and bad place, the system will still be in place. So we think that it's important for them to know it, because it leads to the second part of this argument, which is that it affects the ability for people to make choices, which ultimately affects the afterlife, right? Knowing the existence of the system enables people to evaluate the morality of different actions in their lives. So, for example, they are more likely to do good if they want to get into the good place, as opposed to when they think that they face no consequences for their actions or whatsoever. So it's moreover, we think that it's principally unjust to punish someone because there's a lack of access to this information. maybe a person is good but not like God-like good, and in the end this person does not get enough credit scores and this person ended up getting tortured in the bad place. We think that this is just unjustified, because what is this analogous to? It's like we do not punish individuals who cannot understand or to be able to confront the law. For example, people with mental disorders in the status quo, etc. So we think that it's just unjust to punish individuals who have done those bad things without knowing the circumstances. Now moving on to my second argument on why we incentivize people to do good on all forms. First of all, why are people not motivated to do good things under their side of the house? And the reason why most people in the movie, and this is literally the reason why most people in the movie got into the bad place, and for 500 years or 5,000 years, there's no one who got into the good place, right? So we think that for a few reasons. Number one, the selfishness, and they prioritize themselves more than others, even when they have the capacity to do so. Generally, when we see how people just walk away from homeless people whom they see on the ground because they might be 5 minutes late to work, and people crowding up to witness accidents, but none of them agrees to call the ambulance, and because they just don't want to get involved in the discussions on the accident whatsoever. And secondly, because people only care about the things that affect them with proximity. So the illustration of this is that the ways in which we react to natural disasters that happen in a foreign country versus in our own country versus in our own state and the very city we live in. I think that it's more likely for people to act on things that directly affects them rather than those things that don't, right? Because if something is less proximate to them, there's no incentive for them to act because it does not affect them at all. And people and humans are animals that are programmed to self-preserve. So if there's something that directly contradicts or contrasts to their own self-interest or their own self-preservation, they're less likely to do so as well. Before I move on, I'll take a few.
Okay, why is it okay for people to treat the vulnerable as a means to get into the good place?
Okay, I'll talk about this in my comparative later on. So on the second layer, why do we further that incentive to do good, and why is it good generally, right? Because we think that right now, when we give people the information about the existence of a good place and a bad place, it associates direct proximity with the actions of people, because it directly affects the afterlife, right? For eternity. For example, if you go to a good place, you get to enjoy eternal happiness. For example, you get to do whatever you want, you are free from sufferings, etc. But if you go to the bad place, you are tortured for eternity, you are attacked by monsters, you have physical torture every single day, etc. So they have the incentive to avoid all forms of torture, because people generally like to enjoy life and avoid pain, right? Given that it affects them as individuals, they are more likely to care about the actions they do on Earth. So what's the comparative? Number one, we think that we have solid incentive structures on our side, because most people are selfish. They don't really care if people are suffering, and we tell you that this is likely to be the case under your side as well, because nothing changes. They don't have an incentive to do good or whatsoever. So people still have a lack of sympathy under your side. When they know that the good place does exist and they get certain benefits, obviously they will put in more efforts to help people, to donate money to the poor people, etc. Because imagining themselves in a good place where they have everything they want, infinite wishes are being granted, and they won't get into get tortured in a bad place is just a very strong incentive. But on our worst case, even if the intentions of people to do good are not as pure, it's still better, because it's just worse on your side if there's no incentives for them to do good in the first place. And secondly, pragmatically, we still win because more people do good. Therefore, it's just better for society and it creates better impacts for the other people. Very proud to propose. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for the fine speech. I would now like to invite the leader of opposition.
Just want to clarify if I am audible and visible.
Yep, perfectly.
Okay, thank you. Let me drink some water. Okay. Verbal PRs. Speech starting in 3, 2, 1. We choose to be good because of our bonds with other people and our innate desire to treat them with dignity as a whole, right? I think opposition stands by this point very, very clearly. So a few layers of road building that seems to be lacking in government's case today. I firstly think that the good place itself has the point of to reward these people with the amazing people who are kind and the people who do things that actually benefit society, right? Which probably means that it's a reward. It's not really an outcome that you're or a consequence that these people receive at the very end of the day, right? But I think that secondly, it needs to be clear that to what extent will people know, or will they actually kind of guess what this good place looks like, right? We tell the government bench lacks this. We tell that you have to visualize how people view the system and how they would think that this system would work to establish the whole incentive structure argument and the outcomes that they want to get under their side of the house, right? So I think that generally, even if you don't disclose towards how this actually works, I think people will genuinely think that's going to be a scoring system based on certain things, right? This looks like you get 5 more credits if you donate to an organization, or you get 10 more credits if you help someone out, etc., etc. I think that they won't know that if you do this with bad intention, you'll slowly get into slowly getting into the good place. You'll get points deducted, but I still think that they have a visualization intuitively that this is how the system is going to work, right? But I think that also you need to remember that only the highest point getters will get into the good place, right? And people intuitively know this set of rules, which probably means that you need to be part of the awareness of the good place as a whole, right? We know where people inside government now needs to actively engage in competition to see who gains the highest score, or to actually do things to ensure that you're able to 100% get into the good place as a whole. We tell that this is the intention that they're going to hold under their side of the house. I think the counterfactual is simple, is that firstly, no one is aware about the good place whatsoever. They will only know of its existence once they die. We want to maintain the status quo, where we want people to do good deeds out of the kindness of their heart, and do this because they know that they are doing the right thing as a whole. And we tell these are the people who should be rewarded at the very end of the day. So the first principle they were trying to run today is that people should do good out of kindness and not for personal gain. Note that this directly clashes with government's argument about incentive structures and the outcome as a whole, right? I think the first layer to this is that the principle of good deeds is that firstly, it has to be done out of compassion, right? When you're able to sympathize with other people's suffering and acknowledge their feelings. But secondly, we have to be done without expectation of compensation or reward, right? We know that the converse is not just kindness or helping out someone anymore. It becomes a trade business under their side of the house, where both parties are milking off each other at the very end of the day. But I think it's the third layer. It's inherently in selfless act when you do good deeds. It's the importance of selflessness to recognize that humans are inherently selfish and focused on themselves, which probably means that selflessness is something that's good and should be celebrated at the very end of the day, right? So the third layer to this is that why this principle actively fails under the government side. I think there's 2 reasons why. We think firstly, people do good deeds for self-gain under their side of the house. It probably means that it ruins the sanctity of it, right? Because now everyone has the incentive is to get into the good place, right? You need to concede that no matter what you do, there is this thought at the back of your mind that will be the main reason to trigger your actions, right? Which probably means that even if this person had a good intention in the very first place, we tell that this incentive structure inherently shifts under their side of the house, because you're constantly aware, or it's intuitive that this thing is going to be at the back of your mind, and whenever you try to do something good, right? Which means that where you only do good things because you have a direct reward, and it probably means that even in life, if this outcome is not going to give them, if it's not going to give them a benefit, they just won't do this, right? But yeah, the second layer, which is inherently bad for society because good deeds just don't exist anymore, right? They're replaced by using acts just for selfish gain, where people get more and more selfish on a day-to-day basis, right? But given now you need to compete for certain points, people put on a facade and they try to sabotage each other in order to get the good deeds first. But it also look like where everyone around you becomes a tool of getting into the good place, which probably means that when you're trying to help out your family members or not, all of this thing, it doesn't actually come from the bond you have with each other, or like the compassion that you have for them, or like the feelings that you have for that person, but it's directly because you are trying to get into a good place, right? I'll move on to the next layer and I'll accept it later, right? We think that the impacts of this is like this directly affects the receiver and how they're now seen as, which probably means they're seen as a means to an end. They're stripping away their human dignity as a whole. We think that this just like revolves around the people who are receiving this action in the very first place, right? I think that firstly, the people will still know if you're doing this out of kindness or not, right? Even if you're trying to do something good, we tell that these people can still sense it by the way you talk to them, right? By the way you look at them. We tell that they'll still know if you're trying to discriminate them, or when you just generally don't care about whether they're happy or not, or whether they're actually going to be better off or not, right? They'll know that you're trying to do this with an intention in mind that's not helping them, which probably means that every individual, no matter poor or rich, deserves to be respected, right? We think the point in which you treat them as a means to an end, or as a tool that you use to get into the good place, you strip away this form of dignity. We thought that this form of dignity should be upheld for two reasons, right? Firstly, it's a fundamental human right because everyone has pride, everyone has feelings. If you're treated as animals, I don't think that they will appreciate you at the very end of the day. We think in the parallel to this that colonies do not thank colonizers for helping them build infrastructure and develop the region because they did it so that they could just get more resources, right? I think that it's simple as this. Before I move on, POI.
Why do the intentions of individuals matter if at the very end of the day you're likely to have more effective altruism on our side of the house?
Okay, I'll move on to this next. This is actually the next layer to this. We question whether this social utility even exists under their side of the house today, right? I think the first layer you need to acknowledge in this layer is that firstly, social utility is contingent upon the principle of human dignity, right? Which probably means that no one in the world can determine what is a good or bad outcome for individuals, right? We thought that this is inherently arbitrary according to whether this person acknowledge that or appreciate this action that you have, which probably means that when you strip away their dignity as a human as a whole, when you only treat them as tools and a chess game that you actually get towards to get into the good place, we tell that this social utility is reliant on the fact that this person receiving and actually acknowledge this form of help, right? Which probably means that on their side of the house, when people don't acknowledge this form of help and when their dignity is not being taken care of, I think that this social utility just doesn't exist as a whole. And we tell that the people receiving your help just does not appreciate this as a whole, which probably means that all they're trying to run about social utility doesn't stand in the debate. Proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for the fine speech. I would now like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
All right, am I audible?
Yep.
All right. Verbal POIs, please. Do they pronounce? All right. Speech starting in second. 3, 2, 1. I'm going to talk about a couple of things in the speech. First, what is the comparative on both sides? Second of all, is this a principled right to do so, entitled to this information? And third of all, on which side of the house are you more incentivized to help people? First up, on a clarification of the comparative. We told you it's fairly clear in the proposition. There are questions, we told you that it's basically a system that is quite tangible and symmetrical to what the concept of hell and heaven we conceive right now in the status quo. The question of the Ella was, but how do individuals actually visualize this system, right? I think it's pretty simple. First of all, generally hell is just bad, and you suffer eternally, and bad things as a whole, and heaven is just the converse. But I just want to note that individuals have different definitions and different rules of what suffering and what enjoyment or like literally what enjoyment actually is. But it does not matter because it might be things, for example, being able to sleep in your bed for the entire day, or things, for example, just not having to do anything. The fact here is that what the commonality that all of these things share is that individuals define those things as suffering, is that individuals define those things as either suffering, so individuals define those things as enjoyment. That is why individuals are incentivized to do these things in the art side of health. Their definitions of what these things are don't matter. Second, big question, how people are likely to buy into this. I think that's pretty simple. Narratives, let's say narratives are controlled by media and generally that people actually do so in the status quo. But second, I just want to point out that emotion assumes that people can know about this, so it's not our burden to prove this. Emotion shuts them up. Their comparison then is a world to which people have no idea of what a system whatsoever is on their side of the house. They cannot fiat the individuals have some preconceived notions on knowing how to do these things, because the fact here is that individuals, in particular human beings, don't have the capacity to imagine something that does not exist to begin with, or something we have not seen before. Things, for example, just the reason is why we are unable to envision how aliens looks like, and the ways which we're unable to envision how other spaces in like the parallel universe actually look, right? That is a comparative you have to defend. First up, is this a principled right to do so? We told you a couple of things at PM that largely went unengaged with. The first thing we told you is that people, because they're affected on the basis of this particular piece of information, they have an absolute right that is entitled towards themselves to be able to acknowledge what is right. The only response we got from Ella was absolute and deafening silence. We told this as parallel things, for example, telling individuals what the risks are ultimately associated with the actions they do. Things, for example, we print pictures of lung cancers on like cigarette boxes where they're like those like cigarette smokers before they purchase it, they were able to see those things, right? They have to defend. This is important for a couple of reasons, right? First of all, understand the ability for it to acknowledge this piece of information is an absolute right that it cannot happen in your city house, and realize that this exists irrespective of the practical benefits in its way. If they need to win this particular class, they need to prove exactly why individuals don't have the right at all to to literally meet the criteria to have this right to begin with. But second, we told you why this principle is important, right? Because understanding affects your ability to make choices in the status quo. Things, for example, if you do good or you do bad, literally is premised upon whether or no this particular system exists or not. We can see there are altruistic means from both sides of the house, for people to do these things. But what about the individuals who do bad because they don't understand that these worst forms of circumstances are likely to be imposed upon themselves? They need to defend the comparative. The very same analogy, we do not punish mental health individuals because they're unable to confine and you're unable to subscribe to stereotypical laws and whatsoever. That is why we don't punish these individuals on a principle ground. Clearly, proposition wins conclusively. On a second issue, then, on which side of the house are you more likely to incentivize people to help? I just want to make one observation here. Instead of just complaining on how the intentions of individuals actually change, they didn't prove a comparative as to why individuals are likely to have an incentive to even help individuals to begin with. We gave you 3 reasons to include exactly why individuals don't have an incentive to help, particularly in the world on your side of the house, in the absence of narrative, where individuals don't understand the consequences of not helping people. First of all, we told you there's human nature to want to self-preserve. Things, for example, you're just selfish, just want to do things that actively prioritize yourself. Realize that it kind of refer this back to the status quo, because the reason is why we want to do good in the status quo is also because we have the preconceived notion of heaven and hell. On their side of the house, you don't have that. It's only on our side of the house we have that. They didn't prove, therefore, in the absence of these forms of narratives, were people still likely to incentivize to help in the instances where they're likely to do so? Let's do if their complaints intentions that actually change on our side of the house. We think, first of all, they don't change on either side of the house. On their side of the house, that's what Bernice also concedes, is that you also do help people out of things like compassion. You also do things out of people like self-pleasure and altruistic means. Those are still the intentions that you hold selfish to yourself, because you feel good doing something for other people. The fact is that it's still a selfish incentive whatsoever on their side. I just don't understand it. But second of all, I just don't understand that even if there's some change in intentions on our side of the house, that it actually affects the ability for to do these things. If we're able to prove exactly why charities on our side, or the individuals' incentives to help people increase on our side of the house, there's to try to whatever the change of incentive barring or don't have on their side. Let's get into why people do have an incentive to do good on our side of the house better. The first thing we told is you draw proximity of the consequence of their actions to the actions they do right now. Things, for example, it is a pretty bad harm to be imposed upon the heads of people if they know they're going to suffer eternally. Things, for example, if they see slavery and they think about, I'm going to suffer, I'm going to be enslaved like that for the entirety of the eternity. We think that is a pretty bad consequence when it incentivizes them to do these things on our side of the house. But second, here's the extension I'm going to add, right? Even if they're able to do some good on their side of the house, why is doing good still better on our side of the house? Because realize that literally our model relies on you doing factual good that is literally considered in this particular system, right? That your actions and your moral actions literally help people, have already uplifted the life of people. That is only considered in this debate. What happens is that argue you have more effective donations, you have more effective charities on our side of the house. If people donate to a flawed charity that is non-functional, and the consequences are they don't get a lot of increase in their credit score. But second, I just want to note that individuals are more likely to make sure that their donations are accountable. Think, for example, which charity do I donate to? I just don't simply donate to whatever charity I think that is that I perceive to be okay and like, for example. But given that individuals' incentives change, we would argue charities also want to be as transparent as possible in our side of house as the collective to this. What is the end outcome of all this, irrespective of the intentions of people? Number one, money goes to the most vulnerable individuals as a whole, because realize, literally we help more people on the ground, right? Their contention to this was all. But right now, vulnerable individuals are viewed as a means to literally help, to literally allow people to literally gain more social status or gain more scores at the very end. But it applies symmetrically on their side, because you also realize you also need to have vulnerable individuals on their side of the house in order to feel compassion, in order to literally feel the gratification you're able to attain from literally doing good things on their side of the house. So it's entirely symmetric on whether intentions are literally clear or not. But the factor is on our side of the house, you have more effective things, and more transparent charities as a whole that really helps the entirety of society to progress. But I just want to add one line of argumentation to weigh in this debate, right? On how this instills a sense of hope amongst the most impoverished and the poorest. Realize that individuals on both sides of the house, the impoverished in particular, the individuals living in poverty, they're immensely hopeless in the status quo. On our side of the house, they acknowledge that there's a means to an end to their suffering, but second of all, they acknowledge there's a potential reward at the very end of the day. So the factor is that you instill hope upon the most vulnerable individuals, and realize this is important, because a lot of times, whether you have hope or not, it literally dictates whether or not you're going to continue to do good, or whether you're going to continue to live. On their side of the house, individuals are hopeless, they're more likely to give up and take on their life, putting it at a comparatively worse outcome. On our side of the house, individuals continue to fight because they're equipped with a fundamental hope and a fundamental belief that they are in fact suffering is going to end, and there's potential for them to literally opt into the very into a life of enjoyment and into a life enjoyment of eternity. For these reasons, clearly proposition needs to advance.
I thank the speaker for the fine speech. I would now like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to further case from side off.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Verbal POIs, please. Speech starting in 3, 2, 1. Firstly, it is not our burden of opposition to prove that people are going to do comparatively more good on our side. Our only burden is to prove that the comparative on government is just much worse off. Secondly, we think the government just continues to defend the role of coercion and manipulation, like the likes of religions using afterlife as a mean to manipulate people. I'll be talking about that later on in my speech and linking this back to the motion. But 2 points of contention right now. Firstly, on whether social utility or ethics are more important. Government says 3 things. Number 1, there are going to be like good deeds happening. Okay, so the first layer of response to this is firstly, I think that, okay, even if you consider that good deeds, some good deeds are going to happen, the likelihood of people treating this as a competition out of self-preservation is just so much higher on the side of government, since now they realize that if they do not do this good deed, there's an extremely high chance that they're going to be tortured forever. That means the good deeds are just going to be one that's dehumanizing, because when in the eyes of desperation, you don't look to people as humans anymore. You look to like vulnerable people as a means of investment into like your future in the good place. That means to say that you are going to look at this vulnerable group of people and thinking, oh, I'm going to help them because it's going to help me. This is something that's disgusting and we do not want to defend this. But secondly, this only opens up avenues to manipulation and abuse through existing structures, like I've already told you before about religious structures using afterlife, because now these structures can come in and coerce people into thinking, oh, if you do not do this certain action, you are going to the bad place forever. Or if you do this certain action, you're only then are you able to go into the good place. This opens up many forms of manipulation for the desperate people and this only helps like people who have already an inability to help other people because of like their current circumstances. Secondly, on the problem of the good deeds that they talk about, firstly, they cannot properly calculate how many points a deed will give. This is uncertainty is just more likely going to exacerbate the problem of over competition. This also means that it's like this is also like a prerequisite to all the manipulation that's going to happen like as a result of that. Thirdly, the altruism that government claims will never happen because number 1, altruism is ultimately a selfless act. Using people as a means to an end, aka getting into the good place, just isn't altruistic. The comparative on opposition is that yes, we still have forms of altruism because now without the knowledge of the good place, people actually do good of the kindness of their own hearts. But okay, even if you assume that there's like altruism on the other side of the house, this is just going to be pushed by many disgusting manipulative tactics. Second thing they talk about is hope. Number 1, we think that the concept of hope is just not exclusive to the good place existing or like people helping out because of the good place. Because firstly, we think that people are still human. They gain hope from like acts of self-determination. Vulnerable people are not necessarily depressed or in extreme dire need of help by patronizing people. They only want to help them out of the need to self-preservation. Furthermore, we think this only props up the narrative that these vulnerable people are only goods at their social utility only exists so long as they are vulnerable. So once they are not like the most vulnerable people and the meaning of like helping them diminishes, this means that these people are just going to be left for dead because now they are going to move on to the next vulnerable group to gain the most points. This is something that's very likely going to happen because of the fear of going to the bad place and the extreme exclusivity of going to the good place. These are all narratives that are going to be propped on the side of the government that is disgusting, and we do not defend this. Number 3, they say that people won't know about the good place on opposition, therefore like people are just unlikely to do bad things. Okay, we concede that people won't know about the good place on opposition, but this doesn't mean that altruism disappears on opposition. Because note that there's still moral education. People are still preaching about how it's good to be good. Secondly, people just know that doing good things out of the kindness of your own heart is just generally good. Because if you do good, you get praise from other people, you get love from your loved ones, you give love to your loved ones. That's like, it just engages like sympathy, empathy, empathetic feelings. This is enough of an incentive for people to do good. And this comes without the innate dehumanization that comes out inside government. But secondly, they say that people are going to do bad. Like, okay, if people do bad, that's literally the criminal justice system. We think this is already enough of an incentive not to do bad. But thirdly, I think that the outcome of altruism is just therefore inexclusive. But okay, we engage with this. We think that the altruism that they are going to achieve is just one that's not good. So this leads to the second point of contention on which side people will benefit more. So this is where I'll be pushing on my extension about how this is just going to turn people to greed. So first layer on incentives of greed. Number 1, I think like the whole house just concedes that self-preservation is like the most important thing towards a human. That means that we are going to fight for what's best for ourselves by any means necessary. This is only going to be pushed by 3 other factors. Number 1, the fear of the bad place. Because now only the highest points get you in the good place. There's also, everyone else goes to the bad place. People just do not want to be tortured forever because of their inherent fear of death and pain and suffering. So that means even if they even if you assume that they do not know about the bad place or like the highest point, whatever thing, that it's just implicitly that the alternative to the good place is one that's horrible and probably torturous, which is already enough of an incentive to like push people to turn to greed. Secondly, on wanting to go into the good place, we think that the good place is just enough of an incentive for people, especially like those desperate people, because it seems like a utopian paradise. Generally, people are already suffering on earth. They want a chance to be happy internally. This means that these are really huge incentives for people to go to extreme lengths to escape pain and suffering. So the analysis to why greed happens is twofold. Number one, there are already existing oppressive structures that enforce these kinds of narratives. This means that comparative on government is where there are likely going to be like forms of religious organizations formed after the good place that function similar to religious institutions that utilize after death in doctrines to push people to do certain things. For example, the church guilting and coercing people into acting certain ways to just because like they may be able to get to the good place, even though the church doesn't know how the calculating metrics as to how they're going to get into the good place. Secondly, this also looks like these kinds of organizations framing certain traits of behaviors as negative and bad for their ability to get points. So this looks like pushing already harmful narratives like homophobia, anti-abortion rhetoric, all those. These are only going to be compounded on the side of government because these existing structures are not going to disappear on their side, and they're only going to be exacerbated by people knowing about the good place. So these organizations are even worse because now they can utilize the urgency of escaping the good place to curse people. Secondly, on hearsay, we think that everybody knows about the good place. Most people are just going to be competing against each other for the highest point. This has already been properly explained by showing at first. So moving on by Bernice. So moving on to the impacting. What happens as a result of greed? Number one, vulnerable people are manipulated. So this looks like the most desperate people, like the people that are most scared of the bad place being manipulated. So even if you get some form of social utility, this just directly comes at the violation of human rights and their right to consent, because there's literally a reason why policing everyone is socially beneficial towards stopping crime, but it's illegal because it infringes upon the basic human dignity. Secondly, this is only exacerbated by guilt tripping. So if you have no means to help someone, now you're basically coerced and forced into, but more so this directly harms people already in poverty and disenfranchised, because now they cannot do anything, but they are only going to be pressured by the existence of the good place and that they're going to the bad place if they do not do good. This also dehumanizes the vulnerable people, because now the vulnerable groups that are ones that are usually getting help are treated as opportunities for self-gain. This is just disgusting. But lastly, on unhappiness, we think this just demeans the life of people on their side of the house, because now they are less able to feel empathy and compassion, because now they are solely focused on doing good and like performing social utility instead of focusing on like engaging like relationships with other people and actually being kind to other people. For all those reasons, very proud to oppose.
And thank the speaker for the fine speech. I would now like to invite the government whip. Government whip, are you here?
Sorry, can you give me a minute? My Wi-Fi is like, my Wi-Fi said it's disconnected. Sorry, wait.
Sure, no worries.
Sorry, okay. I'll take your eyes verbally, yeah, after 5. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. What matters isn't if people are good or bad. What matters if they are trying to do better today than they were yesterday. No matter what, at the end of the day's debate, we already have proven to you that on side of government, we are still able to help more individuals on the ground, and that's the most important impact in today's debate. Very proud to propose. I'll prove two things in my speech today. Number one, there is a right for everyone to know about the good and bad place because it's inherently immoral for you not to inform people. But second, even in our worst case scenario where people's intentions are bad, at least on our side house, we still help people on the ground and make their lives better. Before I move in to my clashes, I'd like to provide one clarification. Basically, they gave a whole argument about how like competition and like how they're like people compete to do good deeds. I'd like to say that this argument falls from the very get-go for a few reasons. Number one, because people just understand that people don't know about the scores. If they don't know about the scores, they can't steal points and compete with each other and be the top because they just don't know how many good deeds it takes for them to get to the top, and they just don't know what their own score is. So I don't see why this like whole argument exists for the first place. But also, even this is also a good impact for outside the house because if they just don't know how many points they have, because they don't know how many points they have, so they'll continue to do good deeds until they die, so they help more people, and only thing like these rich people they will just keep like doing good deeds until they like reach the good or bad place, right? So on their whole argument about competition is just false, right? So moving on to my two main clashes in today's debate. Number one, is it principally justified for them to actually know about the good and bad place? What is opposition's response to this? They don't directly respond to this whole argument, and they just ignore this whole principle that my first and second speaker has already pushed to you, and they just push the harm instead. People like they just completely ignored this whole principle and it remains unengaged with, so it still stands at the end of the day's debate. But instead of responding to this, they push this harm. It's basically that people like they just tell us that when people know about the good and bad place, like people are starting to will start to compete for points and do as many good deeds as possible. The response to this is, number one, if they sabotage each other and if they do corrupted deeds to harm each other to get more points, they just get their points deducted in the end of the day, because obviously lobbying or bribery are all immoral. So I don't see why like rich people or like people who want to get into the good place will have these incentives to do corrupted shit anyways, right? Because they're gonna get their points are gonna get deducted, right? But the second thing is like people competing to help the poor is still a good thing, because there's literally so many people that are in need of help, like poor people, cancer patients, kids who are deprived of education opportunities. These are all people who are in need of help, and we don't see why people competing to help them will harm them in any form way, because in the end of the day, they're still receiving help, they're still receiving donations, which is a big impact that we get on our side of the house. But then they tell us that, oh, these people need dignity and they need like face, right? But it's unclear as to why people won't appreciate the help, because even if dignity is a thing, they need to solve the imminent problems. For instance, poor people need food or else they will die. That they will very much appreciate the rich people donating food to them, although their intentions are bad, right? Because at the end of the day, if they have dignity and they starve to death, they're still dead, right? So I don't see why dignity is the most important thing, and why dignity should be like why food and help from the rich should be traded off, right? Because and they call us disgusting people for helping rich. They call us disgusting for helping people to get into the good place. Well, you are more disgusting for allowing people to just die because the donations are not just from the heart, right? You are disgusting for letting these innocent individuals die and get deprived from getting help because donating is just not like from the heart, right? I don't see why it's so important that it's from the heart. Okay, so what is the impacts on outside the house? We already proved to you like multiple times throughout our principal argument that because individuals are directly affected from the good place and bad place, if they're gonna get burned and get skinned and have internal suffering in the bad place, they should be able to know, and they have the right to know, to actually have the opportunity to change themselves. They should know the consequences of their actions. And because some opposition just doesn't engage with this whole principle at all, and it's too late in today's debate, we should already take the debate. But moving on to the second clash, on which world is better off and where are people better off, right? The premise of government's case gives us a few layers. First, that people should do things out of the kindness of their heart. I don't see why this is important, because at the end of the day, we already said we still help people. Please engage in this. And they give us no analysis as to why their side, they'll be selfless people. Anyways, because selfish people still exist more under your side because they're
POI.
just less of a reason to do good. This no thank you. Well, and the status quo, there just isn't selfless good deeds, right? Because, for example, the government donating money to the poor, pushing for policies, they're all these things they do is just to get support from the majority and to be viewed as a hero, right? If you go to a soup kitchen, it still benefits you because you get self-gratification and you still feel good. So I don't see, literally don't know what is your definition of a good deed, because everything that you do, if you do good, you still get benefits out of it. So I don't see what this selfless good deed, and because they haven't characterized to us what is this selfless good deed, I don't know what their impacts are. But the second thing is they tell us about religious manipulation. But religion is still gonna antagonize LGBTQ people anyways, because the Quran won't suddenly say gay people are all right? The difference is just whether they can use heaven or hell to curse people. There are other things to curse you anyways, like saying you're trash, and is no different from you going to hell. They're both common and there is harming you. And we already told you why is a greater accepted structure. But the last thing is about how people can get hope through other means. But I don't see how you get hope on your side of the house when your parents are killed and your family is in poverty, right? Then note that side opposition cannot defend the belief in heaven and hell because it's already symmetrical to this system. There's no delta if you want to have heaven and hell. This means there's literally no hope and no there's literally no hope and no motivation for the impoverished. Hope is only exclusive on our side of the house because people know that there is a possibility for them to enjoy life, and if they do good, right? Because the credit score system also applies to them. Poor people also need to uphold their moral compasses to do good. Even if they have less capacity to do so, like things like donation, philanthropy, they can still do simple things like helping a kid who fell down, or at least don't commit crimes, right? So what have we proved to you on our side of the house? Number one, that we already pushed you a principle why everyone has the right to know about this system, which remains unengaged with. And number two, how we, at the end of the day, even if people's intentions aren't moral, at least we help the most vulnerable people on the ground, which is an exclusive impact that we gain on side proposition. Very proud to propose. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for the fine speech. I would now like to invite the opposition with.
Hi, just check if I'm visible and audible.
Yeah.
Yeah, so to repeat, I prefer my POI to him verbally. I will take you after 5. Speech starting in 3, 2, 1. In this debate, it simply isn't our burden to prove that we get more social utility on our side. All we need to prove and the burden to defend is simply have you let people know about the good place that directly leads to so much harms on side government of the house. It's unfair that side government to put this burden onto us, right? We think as long as we are able to prove that people are still able to do good deeds on the outside of the house, the impacts then are still the same, right? What they then need to outweigh is whether they're okay using human beings as tools in order for you to get to an eternal utopia. Where I think people are going to compete to see how they can become the best human being. Where I think this is performative activism, right? They have to defend the fact that so many more organizations are going to spring up to abuse the existence of the good place, to exacerbate the problems that already exist, i.e. in religious organizations. The only response that religion exists on both sides, I think, is just not enough. Two clash into this debate, right? On to the first clash. Let us engage that having the right to information. I think it's just really a principle that falls on the very get-go. First layer to this. The premise here is that people are going to be affected forever, so they need to have this knowledge in order for them to perform good deeds. I think on the first layer, if you're a bad person and do bad things that directly harms all the people around you, that directly takes away the joy and the utility from the people's lives, you should go to the bad place, right? Because I think you cannot regret all your actions when you're faced with the consequences. You cannot change and decide that you're going to become a good person only when the judge, like Sean from the bad place, decide that you should listen to jazz music for eternity in hell. I don't think only when you have a punishment, then you should have this change, right? Therefore, because doing good just seems basic human decency, side government cannot come to us and tell us that as a human being, you can only do good things. You can only become a better human being when you have this information that you're going to suffer in hell. I think what they're promoting on that side just that it's very toxic incentive structures that tell you that if you're only when you have this incentive, therefore you do good. I think this premise just falls the very get-go. Let's just compare this to the principle that we tell you, right? Now, which moves on to the second layer. What's the true meaning of doing good and being a good human being? I think on the first list, you help people out of compassion. I think DPM comes to you and gives you this really weird response and tells you that if gratification and compassion is what incentivizes you to do good, it's still directly using people as tools. Therefore, what we say isn't exclusive anyway. I think DPM just cannot come up to you and tell you that it's symmetrical, where on their side, people directly use you for your own gain, for something materialistic, or for stepping stones in order for you to gain like eternal happiness, right? But even if we bought this is true to a certain extent, the key difference then becomes, I think, what happens is with compassion, you treat them as someone of your level, treat them as someone as your equal, right? The thing for you to get into the good place, like power, good place, where if your power is symmetry on your side, where you're always deemed as the inferior, this directly challenges the fact that the incentive structure and how people receive it is directly different. Also, we do this without wanting any benefits in return. We do this just because you think that people are suffering, because people need you do it out of the kindness of your heart. Therefore, our principle still stands to this debate. But the third layer to dismantling the entire principle, why on their side then are people more likely to have bad intentions, right? I think like just a clarification, I think they misconstrue this. I think on their side, the only thing that people know is that if you do good, you equals that you go into the good place, right? This directly means that people are going to do good just solely because of this incentive, just solely because they have this like nugget of information. That's why they do good, right? Process analysis to this. I think because what happens to this, for example, they see vulnerable people desperate and poor, and therefore they're going to likely to be the most important people getting the most points, right? Therefore, they're going to just directly help them because of this. And once they do not meet the standard of extreme vulnerability, therefore you lose social utility, right? But you're just only going to help people that they see as people who are able to get them the most points, people that get the most credit in order for them to get to the good place, right? But even if we bought to a certain extent, they had some good intentions, there's always going to be the devil on their shoulder. There's always going to be a voice inside their head telling them affecting their actions, triggers to the actions because of this good place, because they know this thing exists, which is a direct incentive for you to do good, like they explained just now, right? It's a direct incentive for you to do good. Therefore, I just think it's likely that people just have bad intentions in terms of doing all this good in order for you to get the good place. Given our principle is so important, there's no response to just why this outweighs their film. There's simply no response, and therefore we think we just outweigh the incredibly flimsy principle that was based on incredibly toxic premises. Moving on to the second flash on social utility, right? Like I already explained to you in the beginning of my speech, I don't think it's our burden to prove that how we are able to get better social utility on our side, but let's just engage with this anyway. So on the first layer, why social utility is wrong for the very get-go and the premise just false, right? Donna tried to call us out for not responding to effective altruism. I think Bernice literally explained to you from the very get-go of her speech, which is a question whether social utility even exists under their side of the house, right? Because notice that social utility then is contingent upon the principle of human dignity, right? But I think no one in the world can determine what is a good or bad outcome for an individual. It's a unique thing that every single individual in the world determines their own, right? To claim that you actually achieve social utilities, it is reliant on the fact that the person receiving actually acknowledges form of help, actually believe that is doing certain good to that side, right? Given so arbitrary, it's a very arbitrary thing. If your side government is simply unable to tell you and call to you, as long as per person receives what this equals to social utility, right? Without each individual reacts to things differently, to certain people, this thing might be seen as given their world, people just don't want to help you because just because like they have incentive to get to a good place. Therefore, what happens is people they're going to be seen used as tools. We don't think to do these people is seen as social utility. On the second layer to this principle, the second layer to this clash, right? On the mitigation, then also we're so able to achieve fairness and accountability because I think we have multiple different counterfactuals, right? I think firstly, okay, let's just engage on effective altruism anyway and take them at their best case. And it's not an inexclusive benefit because people are just going to help the vulnerable regardless. Because I think in our society today, we already have so many structures to help people, where it looks like increasing trends to help people like NGOs, like charities. This means that directly the impact of altruism is directly symmetrical. I think it puts pressure on those that don't have extreme amounts of money, just donate. Because I think what happens on government side, it just puts pressure on those that just don't have extreme amounts of money to donate to all of them. We think this benefits the rich people and unfair towards the poor. It directly shames those that are unable to help people. It directly frame as not good enough. People who are unable to get good place. Before 6, are there any POIs? 3, 2, 1.
Your
Okay,
world
notice how
is contingent
yes.
upon you defending status quo. We told you why your world is no status quo. You don't have preconceived notions of hell and heaven. Where is that incentive for people to donate?
Here's the thing. I don't think the incentive of people donating is because of heaven and help. From our very principle that they just decide to ignore over and over again, it's because people help out of the goodness of their heart. Because people just think that if they see someone suffering on the street, they've not enough food, they're like have dirty clothes, just go to them and help them, give them food because they're not going to die and stuff. You don't go. People's incentives, oh sure, there might be heaven and hell. But I think most people's incentives, I explained to you multiple times from our principle, is because of this reason, because you're good, because you're a good human being, because you want to help them. This is exactly why our principle outweighs them. That principle from the very get-go, right? Okay, but moving on, right? And the third reason, level on the social utility class, right? Even if we consider that outside, it just isn't able to achieve all the social utilities to the extent of the government. I think what we tell you is that we think using humans as tools is just bad, and the people around you is going to be directly harmed. It's the same analogy as why we hate Britain for colonizing Malaysia, even though they helped set out a lot of the system used in Malaysia today, right? It directly means that even if to a certain extent that does benefit, you cannot, because of the stripped down human dignity, because people downtrodden on you because they oppressed you in the past. This just means that you shouldn't be able to achieve the social utilities. These are just outweighs the social utilities that state government wants to tell you about. But you just cannot properly develop connections with people if you're not willing to engage without the intention of going to the good place in mind. Therefore, the exclusive impacts and harms we tell you that happen outside government are three things. Like people are going to be used as tools, a means to the end that really restricts human dignity. Second of all, people are just have this facade and just afraid to make mistakes. They have this toxic culture that, oh, if you make a mistake, you aren't going to get a good place. People just got this toxic culture and afraid to make mistakes. But lastly, we coerce and guilt trip people into making you donate to charities, or for example, even if when you have no means to, even if when you yourself are suffering, because they tell you, if you don't do this, you don't get a good place. Just like the coercive religious structures that exist. But I think they are unable to outweigh this. To end my speech, to quote our Queen Tahani, the problem is if you care about all the words of velvet rope, you'll always be unhappy, no matter which side you're on. Very proud to oppose. Thank you.
And the speaker for the fine speech. I would now like to invite the opposition reply speaker.
One second, drink some water. Okay. Speech starting in 3, 2, 1. I think opposition completely agrees with Tahani when he says it's not about who you know, but enlightenment comes from within. The Dalai Lama texted me that. I think this itself is the core of opposition's case, right? I think that firstly, our side don't have to take up the burden of incentivizing people to do more good. We inherently have to prove that why it's going to be worse off under their side of the house, right? So don't like. I think that the burden pushing coming from government just doesn't work in this case, right? But the first clash today is under which side are people better off, right? There's two layers to this. Firstly, in terms of those who are impoverished, but secondly, in terms of the majority of people in society and the normal average Joes that will be affected as well. Again, firstly, in terms of the people who are impoverished, I think the proposition tells you that the biggest push is in terms of social utility and effective altruism. I think that the whole premise of government is that, oh, in opposition, we have zero reasons to donate to the poor. But you just ignore the fact that we have charities and NGOs and etc., where people just donate out of compassion and donate out of like sympathizing with other people suffering as a whole, right? We tell the government is obligated to respond to all of these things, given that both sides of the house concede. And on opposition, the counterfactual is basically status quo, except like the good place exists, right? I think given that we've given you multiple layers of analysis to show why effective altruism is still achieved under our side of the house, we take on the major impact coming from government, right? But what the opposition brings to you is that every individual, no matter poor or rich, deserves to be respected, right? The point in which you treat them as a means to an end, as a tool that you use to get into the good place, you strip away this form of dignity, right? We've told you multiple times that this form of dignity should be upheld because this is a fundamental human right, which probably means that even if you throw a lot of money to the kids in Africa, where you're not able to acknowledge their feelings, when you disregard their feelings as a human as a whole, we think that you're trying to give them a life where they live without emotions, right? Where they live without a soul. We tell them to the point in which they're able to be alive without having a soul is just a fundamental it's just fundamentally unjustified, right? We've given you a lot of examples. We've told you before there's a parallel towards the colonies not thinking that colonizers are a saint or they should appreciate the help coming from colonizers just because they help them build infrastructures and develop the region and because it caused social utility, right? The second layer in terms of the majority of people in society, I think that this layer exists even if they can claim social utility. I think there's a lack of engagement towards this from government branch as a whole, right? We've told you in the first layer that there will be oppressive structures that exist like similar to churches right now, right? We think that given that on their side of the house, the only visual that they want to push to people is that you'll burn in hellfire for the rest of your life. It just allows more way for people to do this, right? We thought the concept of religion doesn't really exist and hell and heaven doesn't exist under our side, which probably means the government whip cannot tell you that this oppressive structure is symmetrical, right? We've given you an example that this looks like when they tell you that if you help fight for same-sex marriage or when you support things like this, you're going to get into the bad place and burn in hell, right? We thought that this itself just dehumanizes the vulnerable and dehumanizes these people from the minority group, where these vulnerable groups are going to be deemed as people who are sinners, right? They're going to deem them as people who can never get into the good place. They're seen as leeches of society that don't contribute at all, even if they do something good, even if they donate the poor people, even if they save these poor people in the very first place, right? So this probably means that they're trying to disregard all of the actors under both sides of the houses, right? In terms of the poor people under their side of the house, I don't think that getting them food is the only basis towards them as a human, right? It probably means that they deserve some respect and they deserve to actually live a life where they are respected and can do things freely rather than just being alive and not doing anything, right? I think that secondly, in terms of the majority of society, I think that all of the people in the minorities, that even if they are not poor, they still deserve in terms of like this respect that's coming from other people in society proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for the speech. I would now like to invite the government reply speaker.
All right, I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Speech starting in 3, 2, 1. 3 things in this reply. First, on the principle, second, on helping people, and third of all, on hope. First, on the principle. Your principle is basically, you prey on vulnerable people. Therefore, the help you give, even if you give help, that is one that is unjust. We told you, number one, on both sides of the house, poor people are still preyed upon because realize the vulnerability of them, that really dictates their ability to need help more. And the ability to want to need help literally means that the rich people, and the only means which rich people want to help people achieve their altruistic means is to help these individuals. So on both sides of the house, you're going to be preyed upon irrespective of what your intentions are. The second, we told it's completely symmetric in second. We told the fact that your side of the house, you want things like compassion. You still want things like love. You do things out of compassion because you hope that you're literally loved at the very end of the day because you're able to help people on that, right? But literally, we told that it's symmetrical because being able to feel compassionate or being able to literally feel loved or that feeling in itself is still a selfish interest that you want to feel exclusively towards yourself. So the point here is that it is inevitable on both sides of the house, irrespective of what you do good for, that some level of selfishness or some level of malicious intent to want to benefit yourself is you want it enough. It directly frames out the principle. But even if you don't buy it, that's weighted against our principle and access to information. I have 2 reasons in particular as why our principle in particular, being able to access these pieces of information is more important than getting preyed upon. The first thing is I want to note is the exclusivity of the harm. Because realize if you get preyed upon, that we told you that it's likely to use on either side. Because vulnerable individuals are the only individuals that need help in society. On the other side of the house, people donate for fame, people donate for compassion, the incentives and these selfish incentives and malicious intent existed symmetrically. But second, I just want to already explain my second speech why helping people in itself, having an intention itself is like literally the association of selfishness with helping people is one that is inevitable. But realize the harms of not being able to make important choices because you lack the acknowledgement of the existence of this particular world is one that only exists on their side of the house. That is why in terms of exclusivity of the harm, they are like our principles more important because it literally introduces a harm that is only exclusive on their side. But second is the availability of compensation. Because realize if you make bad choices and you didn't get into the particular good place, that particular harm is one that is irreversible and you need to suffer an eternity, but most importantly, that cannot be compensated. On their side of the house, even if they actually prey on you, they still need to help you as a poor individual. That is why the dehumanizing part you actually endure from getting preyed upon is compensated to an extent where literally when you have food to eat and you do not have to starve to death at the very end of the day. So it's a form of trade-off that they have to make on their side of the house, versus the world on their side of the house, where you lose the access to information, is you lose the ability to literally get into a world to suffer eternally as a collective. That is why our principle is more important. Second issue on helping people. The observation what I have here is that they call us for pushing this unfair burden on how say it's unfair proposition to push opposition to defend a comparative benefit. The fact is that if you don't prove why you are better, then if you only prove you're slightly available or like literally it's metric, then you are conceding to the fact that proposition is better and like we help people better, we still win this debate anyways. we told the incentives are far greater in our side of the house. They say, oh, altruism is likely to exist on either side. Because we do agree with that. The distinction of the proposition is that you motivate individuals to do more at a very day. No response comes from their side. But second, we told about effective altruism. They say that, oh, social utility only matters and it's contingent upon human dignity. No, it is dependent on whether or not people are helped. It is dependent on whether or not people are literally starving or they drunk. It is an objective thing, third opposition. You cannot strawman it by simply telling me that it's a mere lie. But even then, that still misses the nuance, right? Because we told you, our argument is contingent upon you have the ability and you have an incentive to fact check on equality of charities you literally donate into. You don't have that on your side of the house, to which even if both sides of the house have symmetrical incentives to donate, the credit system just incentivizes individuals to make sure that their good deeds come into play far more superior on our side of the house. It's not symmetrical. Lastly, even if vulnerable people get preyed upon, why is getting help better? First of all, the first metric to evaluate this is on bearability. Realize it is comparatively more bearable to be preyed upon, and you can neglect those things and move on, versus having to starve on the ground. And realize it is not just you starving on the ground, it's really your family and your loved ones have to starve on the ground. That you literally have to witness report that the individuals that you love to starve on the ground. We say that is a comparatively less hard. That is a comparative harm that is harder to bear. But the last thing is that even if dignity is a part of your rights, realize if you die on our side of the house because you starve and you don't have resources to access, that eradicates all your existing abilities to exercise all potential rights you can have. That is why the right to survive and the right to be able to receive health benefits is one that is comparatively superior than the right to access dignity that comes secondary at best in this debate. For these reasons, proposition to take the debate.
I thank the speaker for the speech, and I thank everyone for this wonderful debate. I would now request everyone but the judges to please exit the breakout room and wait in the main hall.